Coming up, Alabama's potentially got a big problem, but Tim Tebow is very confident in Nick Saban. We'll tell you all about it next, right here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to AT&T SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We're glad to have you with us. We got a really fun hour coming up. Obviously, we're looking ahead to SEC bowl games. We're thinking about the two SEC teams in the college football playoff. But also December 20th looms large here, the start of the very first ever college football early signing period. We'll talk a little recruiting on today's show.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Diving in a little bit deeper into recruiting as we start to get closer to December 20th. Right around the corner, a week away for a lot of these football teams trying to get these guys to sign on the dotted line.
I will tell you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless and DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. Before we get to any recruiting stuff, really anything else, let me start here with the way we always begin our show. Item number one on our AT&T SEC Country Live first and 10 list as we look at the Sugar Bowl matchup between Alabama and Clemson and a potential problem. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, the fact that Jeremy Pruitt, the Alabama defensive coordinator, for at least one more game, maybe two more games, but also now Tennessee head coach, the distraction of divided time, divided allegiances, time spent working as a recruiter for Tennessee, time spent as a coach preparing for Clemson. Is that a problem for Alabama? Well, Nick Saban described last week about exactly why he thinks that Pruitt's going to be up to handling the challenges of working double duty. Here's Nick Saban.
I think that each individual, handles a circumstance like this relative to how they can stay focused on two things. I remember when I went to Michigan State as an assistant coach way back in 1994, I think. I was at the Cleveland Browns. We were in the playoff hunt, and Bill made it as accommodating as he could for me to have someone who helped as a secretary to do all the things and handle all the things so I could focus on doing what we needed to do for our players. But most of the really good coaches that have great competitive character are always going to do what's best for the players. Kirby certainly did a good job of that, and I'm sure Jeremy will do a good job of that this year.
I like what you said when we played this audio yesterday. That's, in your mind, they shot it towards Lane Kiffin, who he did not kind of sort of mention in that same group of professional coaches who are driven by competitive spirit to be good at both the jobs. But nonetheless, Nick Saban doesn't seem to be too worried about Jeremy Pruitt and his ability to handle this double duty here for Alabama and Tennessee. What I was a little surprised, though, was that some of the SEC network analysts kind of feel the same way, that Alabama is actually not in too tough of a position, given that fact that Pruitt's at least spending part of his time thinking about what's going on in his brand new job, Tennessee. Let me give you an example here from Marcus Spears, who obviously knows the situation around the SEC pretty well, and he doesn't think that Pruitt thinking about Tennessee is going to be a problem for Alabama. Here's Marcus Spears.
It's how you manage it. I think it's a little bit easier being a defensive guy, to be honest with you, because Nick Saban has such a hand in what they do defensively. Last year was different, though. You lose an OC, change in philosophy, your quarterback is used to the calls being made a certain type of way. I think that's more of a distraction. But as far as defense, Nick Saban controls that.
So do you think that's true, that it's easier on defense than offense? I mean, Marcus Spears is a defensive guy, so for him to say that, I guess I'm going to listen to him here. But, I mean, it's almost as if we're saying, not having Lane Kiffin in the national championship. And actually, somebody in the comment section sort of mentioned that. Christopher P. Shooter-Smith brings up in the comment section of, you didn't have Kiffin last year. That's play calling in a national championship game, whereas this is just defensive calls. But are we really to believe that the defensive calls are somehow less important than the offensive play calling is?
I think as Nick Saban as head coach, absolutely. I think when you look at a guy like Dan Mullen as an offensive coach, I think it would be flipped around in the reverse. I think that Nick Saban has such a hand in the defense at Alabama and has such a hand in what Jeremy Pruitt and Kirby Smart are both doing at all times that I'm not sure a lot of things get shuffled up with Jeremy Pruitt leaving. I think Nick Saban is still looking over everybody's shoulder.
Well, then what are we paying these guys $1 million for? And I mean this in all sincerity. What are we paying these coordinators $1 million for if Saban can do the job without him?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's the going rate, I guess. I mean, Jeremy Pruitt, to me, is one of those guys that's probably has a bigger impact on the field during practice hours, being able to work with the linebackers, being able to work with the DBs, kind of putting his knowledge base on some of these guys, how he wants them to play, not only as one, but wants them to play together. I think that's where it becomes a big point. Not only that, but listen, Nick Saban's one of these coaches. He doesn't spend all his time in the defensive room. He's one of those guys that kind of travels back and forth. He has notes. He knows exactly what the offensive line is supposed to be doing at all times. He knows where your head placement is supposed to be, where your hands are supposed to go. He knows what the calls are supposed to be at the line of scrimmage. So I think you have to have that guy on staff, and a guy like Jeremy Pruitt commands money like that, and Nick Saban feels like he's a good recruiter and a good defensive guy.
Diedrich Frazier says this is a problem for Philip Fulmer, meaning the employer that's getting shortchanged is the new employer, Tennessee, not the old employer, Alabama. To a certain extent, I probably agree with Diedrich on that. There's more to be suffered here by the program trying to get ready for recruiting, not having Jeremy Pruitt working full-time on that. Also in the comment section, Jeremy Pettis says Alabama's going to be able to handle it because Saban's going to call the defensive plays. But I wonder if we're not shortchanging the preparation that goes into getting ready for Clemson. You know, the hours and hours and hours that's typically spent looking at film, trying to look for every tendency that Kelly Bryant shows, every, tendency that Clemson shows from an offensive standpoint. If some of that's not missing here with Pruitt thinking more about the 2018, 2019, 2020 commits for Tennessee than he is thinking about, what's going on here with the Clemson Tigers.
I think there's a possibility of that, too. I also look at the fact that a guy like Tosh Lupoi is on staff at Alabama. He's a guy that, a lot of people think could get that defensive coordinator role after Jeremy Pruitt leaves. Maybe this is a dry run for him. Maybe Tosh Lupoi is kind of taking that seat in the film room when Jeremy Pruitt's not able to be there, and maybe he's, being able to give his input on some of these situations. I don't know that he has the knowledge base that Jeremy Pruitt does, but to me, the biggest impact comes down to recruiting on both sides. I don't know that Alabama's getting what they want in recruiting right now with Jeremy Pruitt recruiting for Tennessee. I don't know if Tennessee's getting it right now. You have your new staff on the road. You have Philip Fulmer helping you out. If you're at Alabama, Jeremy Pruitt's already built these relationships with a ton of these recruits, and does that relationship suffer? I'm not sure anybody really knows the answer to that.
Let me also hear Tim Tebow on this from the SEC Network, who is emphatic that he doesn't think this is a problem whatsoever. Here's Tebow.
If you think that Nick Saban isn't going to have this D so locked up, this game plan so tight, and Brian Daboll's not working day and night on the game plan and offensive side of the ball, listen, I don't think they're going to miss a beat. I think Jeremy Pruitt is a very big-time coach. I think he does a very good job hands-on players. But this Alabama defense, it's about Nick Saban, and he ain't going anywhere.
Fair to point out, though, that Nick Saban having the defense on lock. I mean, Clemson's had some success offensively against Alabama 2 years in a row. Now, of course, Alabama won the game after the 2015 season, but lost the game last year after the 2016 season. So, I mean, this is an Alabama defense that has had trouble against Clemson, probably fair to point out.
Well, and it goes back to Tim Tebow's point that maybe this doesn't have that much to do with Jeremy Pruitt. Jeremy Pruitt wasn't around for both those games when Clemson was able to beat up on this Alabama defense. Maybe that's just the Clemson way of kind of attacking this Nick Saban style of defense. And it's a similar defense no matter who you're kind of, whether it's Kirby Smart or Jeremy Pruitt or Nick Saban, they're all running very similar styles. Will Muschamp can get thrown in that as well. So, even if Alabama loses to Clemson, I don't know that you'd be able to fall back on the argument, well, if we had Jeremy Pruitt in this game, because like Tim Tebow said, these guys are going to be lined up in the right situations. They're going to be fully prepared. They're still going to be preparing the same way. Maybe just a little bit of slight input that you're missing with Jeremy Pruitt doing all the recruiting, but I don't know if we see that much fall off.
Lukaku says run the ball, meaning talking about Brian Dable. Yeah. Like we did to open the third quarter against Auburn. We ran it down their throats, then abandoned the power run like a bad date. So, I mean, maybe that is the issue for a lot of Alabama fans. It's not so much who's calling the defensive plays, but it's play calling in the college football playoff.
Yeah.
I think that, and we've talked about this over and over again at AT&T SEC Country Live, that going Sarkisian instead of Kiffin last year in the national championship game was a mistake. I know that some people weren't happy with Dable after the Iron Bowl game, where he did kind of abandon the running game a little bit. Probably focused more on Jalen Hurts' design runs than actual running back runs, which was a problem for some people. I mean, maybe this is the issue for the Sugar Bowl against Clemson. That's more about what Brian Dable does with his offense than anybody who may be calling the defensive signals for Alabama on that side of the ball.
I tend to think that way. I think that Alabama, for the most part of the game, I think they're going to be able to get off the field a little bit. I mean, Kelly Bryant, I don't know that he's as polished a passer as Deshaun Watson. Some of these back shoulder throws and over-the-top throws Deshaun Watson was making for the last couple of years are really what beat that defense. But I have to agree, with the comment about the running game, Brian Dable in that Iron Bowl, I think that he called a lot of quarterback, running back read options. And to me, when we go into this game plan against Clemson and we start to look at what Brian Dable's trying to do, I want to see the running back get the ball. I don't want to see, he saw this guy crash down, so he kept the ball and went around the end. the running back and that offensive line that's getting those double teams, getting that push up front, I want to see him turn around and not have the option to hand it off. I want him to hand it off the running back and see what the running back can do.
Jeremy Pettis, by the way, in the comment section says that Pruitt's departure is going to maybe hurt Alabama more in recruiting than it does on the field against Clemson, and that may be true. Think about like a 4-star linebacker like Quay Walker from Crisp County. That's the guy that Derek Ansley had to take an in-home visit with to try to solidify his standing as an Alabama commit because he was so close with Pruitt. I mean, there is some examples of that. We'll talk more about Alabama recruiting in our show here today, but Pruitt leaving does have an impact on, some of those potential Alabama recruits. By the way, even some offensive guys as well. Jacob Copeland from your hometown of Pensacola, Florida. That was a guy that was also close with Pruitt too. And I thought that Copeland's going to visit Tennessee this weekend, so Pruitt could be impacting Alabama recruiting on both sides of the ball here.
Well, and to me, that's the biggest issue when we talk about, how does Alabama cope with the loss of Jeremy Pruitt? And if we're talking about X's and O's, we're talking about game planning. I think it comes down to those recruits that are maybe in between. Maybe that Jeremy Pruitt's still in a guy like Jacob Copeland's ear. I think there's probably a handshake agreement between Nick Saban. Listen, these committed guys, you probably try to stay away from a lot of those guys, but listen, if you have a guy like Jacob Copeland and all of a sudden Jeremy Pruitt's down the hall, he's calling Jacob Copeland, and Nick Saban's at the other end of the hall calling Jacob Copeland, I think then that's when you have a possible issue on your hands.
And that'd be one of those things, if that ever came out, fans would be so mad about that. Georgia fans would have been livid about Kirby Smart with that going in 2016. Jeremy Pruitt in Tennessee the same way. Listen, I get the idea of you got to have some respect for the guy that helped you get to this point. Smart and Pruitt, none of these guys would have the jobs they have if not for Nick Saban. But you can't let your fan base know that you in any way deferred to Saban on any kind of recruit because, you got hired to take these guys away from Saban. Otherwise, you might as well go plug somebody else from somebody else's coaching team.
Yeah, and I agree. Listen, I also wouldn't want to be the guy in Jeremy Pruitt that got caught down the hall, calling the same recruit that Nick Saban's calling at the same time. And I understand Jeremy Pruitt's got his own agenda that he wants to tend to. And Tennessee's fans, they deserve that. They deserve to have a guy that's going to go out and try to find the best players possible. Not having respect for your rival for the third Saturday in October, but going out and getting the best players possible. I think that's what Tennessee fans want in a head coach, and I think that's what they deserve.
David Sullivan, by the way, in the comment section says, no matter who's calling the defensive game plan, can I just see somebody cover frickin' Renfro this time? Obviously, the Clemson receiver that's had a lot of success against Alabama.
I'm the same way. Him and Deion Kane and a lot of those other players that have had success for the last couple of years. That's what you want to see if you're an Alabama fan. Who's going to line up against them? Is it going to be Tony Brown? Is it going to be Minka? To me, that's the biggest key in all this stuff.
I promise we'll move on, but Roderick Henderson says Brian Dable hasn't called great games when it mattered. Listen, I've been trying to tell y'all, Lane Kiffin, I thought, was a very good offensive coordinator for Alabama, and I do think that Brian Dable is an inferior comparison to Kiffin as a play caller.
Well, I think a lot of people are probably inferior in comparison to what Lane Kiffin was. And listen, you go back before Lane Kiffin, you had a guy like Doug Nussmeier, you had a couple of offensive coordinators that didn't work out under Nick Saban. Major Applewhite was the OC my first year, and he took the receiver's job the next year at Texas, if that tells you anything about how welcome he was back as the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, let me move on here to item number 2 on our AT&T SEC Country Life First and 10 list. Obviously, all is fair in love and SEC football recruiting. Maybe the latest example of this coming from South Carolina, who's potentially in the mix with one of the top names in the entire country, 5-star defensive end KJ Henry. And apparently, Will Muschamp ready to pull out all stops, maybe, in order to win the services of Henry. I thought Brad Crawford from 24/7 had an interesting tweet. He says, as the recruiting world turns, sounds like the Gamecocks could get a leg up on Clemson and Alabama for 5-star defensive end KJ Henry by hiring his father as a 10th assistant. His decision comes December 20th. A couple things here. For this upcoming season, there will be 10 assistant coaches for all teams in college football, so everyone's hiring a 10th assistant. South Carolina not unique in that regard. Henry's dad is the running backs coach at Charlotte. The 49ers, a relatively low-level Division I football program. So Henry's dad is a coach, maybe not on SEC radars, though, if it wasn't for the fact that his son's KJ Henry. If a team, not just South Carolina, but any team, made a coaching hire like this to win a 5-star recruit, is that okay with you?
No, I don't think it is. And I think there's too many misses as it is when it comes to college football recruiting. I mean, every year we have a 5-star, if not 2 5-stars that don't really pan out, don't become a big deal. And I think the fact that he plays linebacker too, I think if you're looking at a 5-star quarterback and one of these just absolute home run hitters at quarterback that can throw the ball, that can run the ball, that is going to change the dynamic of your team for years to come, maybe you go that route. And I say maybe, I give it a 10% chance maybe. But you're talking about a linebacker whose dad's a running back coach at Charlotte and possibly putting him on the 10th staff. I think there's too much to lose if you're South Carolina and Will Muschamp. As possible hires that you can get on your staff, I don't see this happening for any of the teams that are looking at him.
Yeah, listen, I actually don't think it's going to happen either. I don't think they're going to hire him as a coach. But, I mean, he is a college coach already.
Right.
So it's not like you're hiring me to be running backs coach. This
Right.
guy is a college coach already. But even with that said, you have got to be an A-list recruiter to work in the SEC.
Yeah.
And you got to be able to recruit more than just your own son here, though. So from that standpoint, I think that no five-star player is worth putting a guy on your staff that's not going to help carry the same load that everybody else is. And if Henry was probably capable of doing that as a coach, I believe he'd already be coaching the SEC.
Yeah,
right?
that's kind of how I feel. That listen, I know that this is going to be a big deal at Georgia, big deal at Alabama. Who's going to be the 10th assistant? Listen, a lot of Alabama fans want a kicking coach or a specific special teams coordinator. There's just too much for me on the line. When you look at the schools that are recruiting him, that listen, I can go out and get an A-plus recruiter, an extra guy to be on the road. I can get an extra guy to help out with the different positions. You just don't throw this extra coach away on somebody that could pan out and could not pan out to be a good player in your program. I don't think the risk is worth the reward.
And I will tell you, Henry had a very interesting quote about this, and it was very specific, because the one thought that I had was, you know, if it was my favorite school, let's bring him in as an analyst. You know, pay him some money that way, and you get KJ Henry in. But Henry already anticipates this. This is pretty clearly a deal where they're trying to, I think, leverage this for Henry to get a job. I'm going to read you the quote from The State, which is the newspaper in South Carolina, if I can find it. Oh, here's Henry. He says, out of my 5 schools, if my dad were to end up anywhere, obviously that's what he loves to do, and he is a part of my family. I like all 5 schools enough to where that could be a big decision coming forward. Now, here's where it gets interesting. This is KJ Henry. It's nothing where it's an analyst type deal or anything like that, but if you could go in and coach, that would be big. So I take that to mean of, don't come talk to me about an analyst job. I want to be an on-field coach. I want to be the running backs coach or the 10th coach. It's obviously a lot more money. It's more job security for the most part. So it's almost like they're anticipating we'll make you an analyst. There's no restriction on those. You can have 9 million analysts, and a lot of them don't make a ton of money. So he said, that's not what I want to be. I want to be a coach. That's the way that I read KJ Henry's quote. Do you read it the same way?
I do read it the same way. It's almost like you can tell that this father-son combo have talked about this, and they've gone over this themselves. And I understand where that's at. But listen, if I'm KJ Henry's dad, Keith Henry, I think is his name, I'd take the analyst role. I'd take the analyst role to go in the SEC and prove what I can do. I don't know how much money you're making as a running backs coach at Charlotte, but I can't imagine it's that much more than you get as an analyst at one of these
Sean Fitzgerald reminds us that basketball dads get hired all the time. Sean's a Missouri fan. He's obviously referencing Michael Porter's dad, who got hired there at Missouri. I believe Michael Porter Jr. is his name, but he got hired at Missouri, and he probably got hurt, by the way, too. So now they got a coach.
Yeah, he's never going to play at Missouri, probably. He's headed to the NBA draft lottery.
But look, here's the thing. If the coach was good enough to coach in the SEC, I'd have no problem hiring him to get the kid there. I mean, that's what you have to do. I can't waste scholarships, but if the dad's a coach and you think he's good enough to coach there, then I don't really feel like it's unfair or out of bounds to do this. In Henry's case, I don't know that he's quite that level of coach.
No, I'm the same way. Listen, if Will Muschamp saw him as a great coach and a great recruiter and somebody that could jump on board and help them, then by all means, I don't consider that backdoor dealing at all. I think that's bringing 2 family members together that you think can both help your program. I think that's a home run. I think it's too much of a risk for Will Muschamp to try to go out on a limb and say, you know what, we're going to just take a flyer on this coach because his son could possibly be good in our program, even though he is a 5-star. I've seen there's just too many risks involved that could sink your program in the end.
I totally forgot this. I'm glad Kevin J. Smith brought this up. This has actually happened before at South Carolina, and some of y'all were giving Muschamp some grief about this before. Bobby Bentley's the running backs coach of South Carolina now. It's Jake Bentley's dad, so Muschamp's done this before. That's actually a really good point. I wasn't thinking about that.
I mean, he moves on from Kurt Roper, so you're looking for an extra coach there in the offensive coordinator. But that kind of goes to my point is that what kind of coach do you need, or you just bring this guy on staff because he's a coach's dad? I think there's too many other opportunities for coaches that can actually help your staff. And not just a guy that's an add-on because his son's good at football.
I mean, here's the thing I think that we both would agree on. If you're bringing on a guy that's not good enough to carry his weight as an assistant coach, that's eventually going to hurt you a lot more than KJ Henry's going to help you.
No, I
that's what we agree on,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right, let me move on here down to number 3 on our AT&T SEC Country Live 1st and 10 list. And topic number 3 involves the Tennessee Vols and some details because of some reporting from 24/7 Sports emerged with the contract for Greg Schiano would have looked like at Tennessee. And this is really baffling to me. Patrick Brown, the writer here for 24/7, gives us some of these details. Length of the proposed deal with Schiano was for 6 seasons, and the former coach at Rutgers would have earned a base salary of $4.4 million with a built-in raise of $50,000 each year. How are you going to pay Greg Schiano, who is an unmitigated failure of the Tampa Bay Bucks, $4.4 million. What? In order to get him to leave being defensive coordinator at Ohio State? This is insane. The guy was not really a candidate for any other job. They were going to pay him $4.4 million, which I do get is sort of going rate in the SEC. But Greg Schiano wasn't an SEC coach. Tennessee fans were right to revolt. They saved their program.
I have to agree with you. And listen, that's more than Jeremy Pruitt got in his contract. So I think there's a reason the timing is the way it is. That this comes out now after your new coach is already recruiting for your school, and he's not saying, "Hey, wait a second, why was this guy getting so much more money than me?" To me, I look at it this angle when this news kind of broke is that Tennessee fans are just so ready for this to be over with. It's just so it's like the story that you can't flush. I mean, you can't get rid of this topic that keeps coming up. I don't know that Greg Schiano even pursues this whole thing. Where you talk about this, him possibly going after money and maybe there's this buyout. He was the coach for 2 hours. And to me, it does more damage to Craig Schiano if he files suit against Tennessee than it does positive things for him.
I don't necessarily agree with that because I think that while I understand your point of it's just more bad press for a guy that probably wants this to go away, the truth is the press was so damaging for Schiano because it kind of got mixed up with whatever happened when he was an assistant coach at Penn State that it's actually, and the uprising against Schiano, I think makes him untouchable for a lot of athletic directors moving forward here. So, I mean, to me, he's got the motivation to go after the lawsuit, and some people say that maybe he could get some money on it, and some people say that he couldn't. Honestly, neither one of us are lawyers. We're not going to be able to give you too many of the facts and details on that. But suing for something and hoping for the best seems like a good strategy here because I actually don't know that Greg Schiano is hireable now, given the way that Tennessee fans uprose against him.
Yeah.
Is that a word, uprose?
Yeah.
The uprising against Greg Schiano. I don't know that he's hireable now because so many athletic directors are going to feel like he's toxic given whatever it was that caused Tennessee fans want to do this.
And that's possible, and maybe he goes after some kind of defamation of character. Maybe there's some kind of lawsuit in terms of that. But I think in terms of what you signed, I just don't know that you could. And how many times have we talk about Mike Leach? You brought up the point that maybe he's not hireable because he is in a lawsuit with Texas Tech. I don't know if you're Greg Schiano, if you want to put that out to file a suit against Tennessee.
By the way, Tyler Mann in the comment section says, can we please move on from the bogus story about Schiano? Tennessee didn't want him, and they were right and justified to feel that way. Move on. Tyler, we're actually defending the Vols fans here on this because, as I said a moment ago, I think it was the Vols fans who saved the program because the athletic director, John Currie, did want him. The most high-profile booster, Jimmy Haslam, wanted him as well. In this case, I wish more things in college football kind of worked this way, where the rank-and-file fans, in this case, I think understood the situation on the ground better than the high-profile Browns owner, Jimmy Haslam. I think Vols fans saved the Tennessee program here. If you had Greg Schiano at $4.4 million, and as somebody else in the comment section mentioned a moment ago, that the buyout was like 75% of the total contract. Eddie Lael mentioned that in the comment section. I mean, if Vols fans don't do what they do, the Tennessee program is not in a good a position as it is right now with another defensive coordinator, Jeremy Pruitt, who does understand SEC recruiting, and I think has just as good a chance to win as Schiano would have had.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the Vols fans kind of took over this thing, and they had a better feel than Jimmy Haslam. They had a better feel than John Currie. I mean, John Currie is ousted because of really the fan kickback, and I'm on board with we're trying to defend Tennessee fans here and tell you that I think what they did was okay. I don't mind this speaking out, and it's like I said, I think it stinks for Tennessee fans that this story just keeps coming up, and there's another layer added every day that you turn on the news. You have to read about Greg Schiano or the contract or the blowback or Herb Street said this or this guy said this. It's time for Tennessee fans to be able to move on to the next chapter, in my opinion.
Let me take one more comment on this. Roderick Henderson says, how does Tennessee have any money left? $8 million to Butch Jones, and certainly John Curry's going to be knocking the door for some money as well. And I haven't heard as much about that, but they did fire John Currie, and unless they can come up with some reason why they fired him for cause, I mean, his contract is, potentially substantial, upwards of $5 million based on the amount that was left on that deal. That's one of those that could be a real issue for Tennessee. In the way that Curry's situation was handled, do they owe him money? They may get away from having to pay Schiano, but do they owe Curry money for making him go away?
I think John Curry's reputation amongst college sports is probably more damaged than Greg Schiano's, honestly. When you look at it really closely, that guy was fired and told to leave the building before they even were able. And he goes out on his own, really, and tries to hire Mike Leach, and this whole debacle made Tennessee look really bad. And like I said, I feel bad for Tennessee fans that there's always another layer to this. I feel like it's almost like the LeVar Ball thing, where it's like you have to report on it and you have to talk about it, but at some point, you're just ready for it to go away and ready to see what Jeremy Pruitt can do on the recruiting trail.
Let me get item number 4 here in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Before I do that, though, I guess I better remind you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless and DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. Item number 4 on our list involves Speaking of coaching changes, that coaching carousel that's been spinning here the last few weeks, Dan Wolken from USA Today had some interesting thoughts about how this impacts college football and specifically the SEC that he mentions. And I want to read to you what Wolken says here, and you tell me if you agree with this. He says there's no doubt that Texas A&M upgraded, bringing in a national championship level coach. Talking about Jimbo Fisher. No doubt that Florida upgraded with Dan Mullen, getting the opportunity to build the same type of program he did at Mississippi State, only with much better recruiting resources. Arkansas also upgraded as Chad Morris going to bring an offensive identity more suited to being competitive that particular program and make the Razorbacks a factor in Texas recruiting. He doesn't mention Jeremy Pruitt, but you could also have this discussion here as well. What Wolken is saying is when you talk about Jimbo Fisher in place of Kevin Sumlin, when you say Dan Mullen in place of Jim McElwain, Chad Morris in place of Brett Bielema, I'll add Jeremy Pruitt as a replacement for Butch Jones. Is the SEC now in better shape with its coaches now that guys like McElwain, Butch Jones, Brett Bielema have been run off and guys like national championship winning Jimbo Fisher, up-and-coming Chad Morris are kind of brought in?
I want to say yeah. I want to look at the top of that, specifically the top two. I think when Dan Mullen goes to Florida and Jimbo Fisher is hired at Texas A&M, I think that's a recipe for championships at both of those places. I think that you can plug them in and automatically assume that they're great head coaches. Chad Morris, to me, not as much of a slam dunk. I like the hire for them. I think he brings a different look offensively, but I don't know if he has done enough for me here in the first week of his tenure. I don't like kind of the approach he's taking. He seems really dry. We don't hear as much. I mean, we hear about Brett Bielema all the time.
Yeah.
And obviously the X's and O's didn't work out, but he became the face of that program. He became outspoken. He said what he wanted to say. We just haven't heard a ton from Chad Morris, I guess is my deal there. I don't want to be the kind of guy right now that it's like recruiting almost, where you sign this top 10 recruiting class and you think, man, we're going to be really good next year. And then this guy doesn't pan out or that guy doesn't pan out and the marriage isn't good here. And then all of a sudden you're left saying, man, what happened to our team? I guess I'm cautiously optimistic about most of the hires we've seen.
I agree with you that at face value, it's too early to say that these guys are all going to be upgrades of the guys that replace them or even collectively the SEC's now upgraded. But the one thing that I think that Dan Wolken is making a pretty good point on, even though he doesn't make this point explicitly, is that, last year there was this narrative in the SEC that I just think was flat wrong. The SEC was trending down as a league because it put too much faith in former Saban assistants.
Yeah.
And Kirby Smart only goes 8-5 in year one at Georgia. Will Muschamp was a failure at Florida and didn't have a great first year at South Carolina. Jim McElwain was obviously having a hard time getting an offense established there at Florida. Kind of on and on you could go. All of a sudden now, though, Kirby Smart, using the Saban formula, has got Georgia in the college football playoff. Will Muschamp overall is doing pretty well for himself at South Carolina. Another former Saban assistant, Jimbo Fisher, is in at Texas A&M. The truth is, the Saban formula, the blueprint, if you're at a school that can copy it, which obviously leans heavily in the direction of bringing in elite talent, 4- and 5-star recruits, that's actually a pretty good place to be. And I'm going to take these former Saban assistants in the SEC over a lot of what's in vogue in other leagues here as well. I think the point here is that the SEC's demise was always greatly exaggerated.
Yeah, I think it was too. I think it was too, and I think you look at what what McElwain went through at Florida, and obviously he's out of there now. I think you feel better if you're a Florida Gator fan about what you have in. But I also look at some of the bottom half of some of these hires. I think that Pruitt has a very high ceiling. I think there's another possibility that could go badly at Tennessee, although I have tremendous faith that he'll make this team play tougher and he'll have more resources recruiting than he ever would have given to another coach. But I look at a guy like Joe Moorhead. I don't know that he's an upgrade from Dan Mullen. I think you can make the argument that maybe he's a downgrade from Dan Mullen. I look at a guy like Matt Luke that gets the coaching job at Ole Miss. Wasn't great in his first year, was pretty good, gets the Egg Bowl win, and you kind of hand him that job because there's really nowhere else to turn when you look at all the coaching vacancies going around the conference. I love the top half. I don't know if I love the bottom half, and we're going to have to see how some of these things play.
Patrick Hopp says, are y'all kidding me? Mullen's a complete upgrade from McElwain. So, Patrick, if I led you to believe that, that's misleading. That's not what I intended. Of all these coaching changes side by side, the one that's sort of the easiest to make a bold statement about is that I believe that Mullen is a better coach than McElwain. It remains to be seen how he's going to do as recruiter. That was obviously McElwain's big failing. But if you give me the two coaches leading the Florida program, I agree with Patrick on this. Mullen's the better choice than McElwain. And from that instance, McElwain is obviously the former Saban assistant, but from that instance, Florida is in better shape with Mullen almost for sure than it was with McElwain.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I'm saying. Like the top two jobs, I think, are slam dunks that you're in a better place than you were a year ago. I think that Jimbo Fisher's a national championship level coach. I think that Dan Mullen can get you there. They're both championship level coaches at championship level places. We don't know what Jeremy Pruitt is. I'm not totally sold on Chad Morris and Mississippi State and Ole Miss right now. It's a toss up to whether or not they're better off than last year.
Eddie Lale says Matt Luke's going to be Orgeron 2.0, obviously referencing his failed time there at Ole Miss. We'll have to see about that. And while I'm very high on Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, I do have to at least open the door of possibility that it might not work out, and he might not be that much of an upgrade over Kevin Sumlin, given just how bad Florida State was this season. I'm still very confident in Fisher as a coach, and I've told you that I think he's a real contender in the SEC West. But there's at least some chance that I'm wrong, given how bad it was there in the end at Florida State.
And I would make the argument that Florida State's probably easier to recruit to Florida State than it is at Texas A&M right now. I think that Florida State kind of, you're going to get speed at Florida State. You're going to get good football players. Jimbo Fisher, that was his only head coaching job. He took over after Bobby Bowden. Those guys kind of became plug-and-play players once that thing got rolling downhill. He really has to rebuild the program at Texas A&M and make it a recruiting destination. I think he's the right guy to do it, don't get me wrong. But I think there is that 1 to 5% chance window that maybe that just doesn't turn out.
Stacey Goebel says Dan Mullen's like 2-15 against ranked teams. Here's the thing, though, Stacey. I know that you know this. You can't really judge Mullen's success against good teams at Mississippi State compared to what it might be at Florida, because the resources he was working with in Starkville so much less than he has at his disposal in Gainesville. It's not a given that he'll marshal those resources the way that you need to win a national championship. But it's just easier at Florida, given the fact that you've got access to top talent.
Yeah, speed. I mean, you're going to have speed. When you go down in South Florida and recruit, when you get some of these recruits from Georgia and from South Florida and really from Northwest Florida, maybe the lower Alabama area, you get speed. That's what you're getting. That's
L.A., lower Alabama.
I'm sorry.
L.A.
I'm sorry, L.A. Yeah, and I should know that from Pensacola. So you're going to get the L.A. guys, and you're going to get speed to be able to plug in. That's what Dan Mullen needs. And it's not like he didn't have good playmakers at Mississippi State, but when you talk about 1-2 guys, the 5 deep at wide receiver at Florida will be like his top 1 or 2 guys at Mississippi State. He's going to have speed all over the place, and that leads to a more explosive offense.
By the way, the best I can tell, some of our regulars and some folks going back and forth on who's DBU, defensive back university. There's a lot of that in the comments section.
Let me guess, is it Florida versus LSU right
There's
now?
some LSU mixed in here. There's some Alabama mixed in there. It seems like Alabama's argument on that may be a little less than what Florida's and LSU's might be, but you got a good back and forth going on in the comment section. That's been kind of fun to watch take place here. Let me move on to item number 5 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And yesterday we talked about a USA Today list of potential Heisman candidates for 2018, which included a trio of SEC quarterbacks. Guys like Jarrett Stidham and Jalen Hurts and Jake Fromm. Well, Andy Staples from SI.com has got his own list of 2018 Heisman guys, and it invites a couple other SEC names in the conversation. Yes, Staples also mentioned Jarrett Stidham, but he brings in 2 names that were not on the USA Today list. First of all, he talks about Nick Fitzgerald, who Staples says suffered a gruesome dislocated ankle in the Bulldogs' Egg Bowl loss to Ole Miss. It's unclear when he'll be fully healthy again. But if he can get back to 100% in time for the season, 6'5", 235-pounder, going to have a lot of fun in the brand-new Coach Moorhead's offense, who obviously comes down from Penn State. The other name that Andy Staples mentions is the Georgia running back, true freshman right now, DeAndre Swift, who will take the place next season of Nick Chubb and Sony Michel, who are leaving. And Staples goes on to say, don't expect Georgia to abandon the run, though, especially as some of its more highly recruited offensive linemen come of age. Many of the carries left behind by Chubb and Michel will go to Swift, who's averaged 8.2 yards per carry, but only 5.6 carries per game this season. Swift also led the Bulldogs in receptions by running backs with 15. So expect the Bulldogs to find a way to get him the ball. So Andy Staples adds 2 more names here to our Heisman short list of Jarrett Stidham and Jalen Hurts and Jake Fromm, another Georgia guy, DeAndre Swift, and Nick Fitzgerald from Mississippi State. Do these feel like worthy additions to you in a potential Heisman Trophy conversation?
I don't think there's any doubt that you're looking at probably 2 guys within the top 10 next year going in, especially when you look at the SEC. I think these are going to be 2 of the premier players in the SEC. I love what Nick Fitzgerald's projection is within Joe Moorhead's offense. I mean, Joe Moorhead, it's a simple offense, but it becomes better almost with repetition. You look at some of the things that some of the ways his offense has evolved over the last couple of years. It really becomes a detrimental offense to a lot of these defenses they're playing. My argument against Nick Fitzgerald would be that, listen, what happened with Saquon Barkley up there? This is a kind of a running back-legged offense. I would think a guy like Aris Williams would have as many or more opportunities as Nick Fitzgerald to kind of be at the forefront of this offense under Joe Moorhead. DeAndre Swift, to me, this is a slam dunk. I think that when you look at teams that are going to be in the top 10 next year, going to be nationally relevant, teams that are charging towards a championship, DeAndre Swift getting some of those carries, he's explosive. Maybe if you're Kirby Smart, you think about plugging him in possibly in a return game role. I think that he's going to get every opportunity to showcase his skills, more so than a guy like Nick Fitzgerald at Mississippi State.
Stephen Early says about DeAndre Swift, don't forget about Zamir White, James Cook, 2 members of the 2018 class as freshmen. But I expect Swift to return up another notch in 2018 and blow the doors off. And one of the things that does, I think, if you're a Georgia fan, excites you about DeAndre Swift is, look at the way he was using that Auburn game in the SEC championship. Georgia, which had drawn some criticism for not throwing the ball to running backs enough, really made throws to running backs a big part of the game plan against Auburn, and Swift was the recipient of a lot of that stuff. I mean, I think that what you saw in the SEC championship game from Georgia could be a bit of a precursor to what the team does more in 2018, and I could see DeAndre Swift being a part of that. But it is fair to say, as Stephen early in the comment section pointed out, when you got freshmen like Zamir White, like James Cook, Elijah Holyfield's still in the mix as well, it's not like even next year Swift's going to have the backfield to himself. Georgia's still very deep at the running back position, much like Alabama has been.
And that's fair to kind of point that out. I think that when I look at it, I see DeAndre Swift as a guy who's like immediately inserted on third down. I think when you get these freshman guys that show up on the campus, it's hard for guys that are going to be running this Georgia program and Kirby Smart to put some of these guys in on some of these third down or bigger plays. And when a guy like DeAndre Swift they can lean on, Elijah Holyfield, some of these guys that have been there, I think we have such an assumption sometimes when it comes to some of these younger guys, they're going to get this many carries or that many carries. A lot of people talked about Najee Harris coming into the year for Alabama this year. Just didn't show up in some of the bigger circumstances because these guys got to learn to block. They got to learn the offense. They got to learn what their role is down in and down out. Right now, DeAndre Swift is a proven right now. So go with what you know is a proven and what you've seen on the field.
Let me give you a slight change of subject. Kevin Chapman said in the comment section, it's a travesty to leave out the SEC players in consideration for this year's Heisman. I hear it was the worst watch Heisman today. That may have been. I don't know how bad the ratings were, but obviously it was a foregone conclusion that Mayfield was going to win. How about Kevin's first point about leaving the SEC guys out of this year's discussion? I'm going to make the case, obviously, for Roquan Smith. Those of you that know my background aren't going to be too surprised about that. I thought he should have finished higher than 10th. But I'm also going to make a case for Kerryon Johnson, the Auburn running back here, who only finished 9th. I think both Johnson and Smith, I think you could have made a strong case. They deserve to be in New York as finalists. Maybe not winning the award, that's fine. But 9th and 10th seem way too low for two guys who had been real catalysts for their teams this season.
Yeah, and that's just what you see, I feel like, on a national landscape when it comes to SEC running backs right now. It's like, these running backs are facing the toughest run defenses in the country week in and week out, and they never seem to get their due on a national stage. I mean, you saw, obviously, Derrick Henry a couple of years ago, but that's a national championship caliber Alabama team, and he ended up running away with because he had all these carries towards the end of the year. But I'm with you. Kerryon Johnson, to me, and obviously he was dinged up early in the year. You look at Darius Geis, who was dinged up for part of the year. You look at Nick Chubb, you look at Sonny Michel, all these running backs doing all these great...
How about Roquan Smith, though? I mean, can you get Roquan Smith?
Well, we had this topic last week, but my thing is about Roquan Smith is if we're going to start getting these defensive guys in the discussion, that should have happened 20 years ago. We've been bypassing defensive guys for forever, and I can't stop with Roquan Smith now and say, oh, well, we should definitely throw him in the mix. There's been outlandish, crazy defensive guys that should have won here in the last 20 years, and they're not a part of it.
Gary Webb also bringing up the name of Kentucky running back Benny Snell. I don't know if he was a Heisman finalist necessarily, Snell, but clearly a guy who's probably on the list of underrated players in the SEC this past
There's
season.
a number of them. I mean, you look at some of the guys at Texas A&M. When you look at guys like Aris Williams at Mississippi State, there's some great running backs in this conference. They're coming up against a situation where, first of all, they're more now than ever, it's running back by committee in the SEC a lot of times. You're seeing these guys get plugged in. There's not like the one guy that gets the ball 40 times a game like you used to in the SEC. It's by committee. You're switching them in and out. And also, they're going up against great defenses. These SEC defenses in front seven are the best in the country right now, and you're not going to get the numbers that you would from a Big 12 running back or a Pac-12 running back. You're just not going to see it.
Can I change the subject for like 2 seconds?
Let's do it.
So, on this show, one of the necessary things you have to do is I have to look down the screen, look at the comment section. You're talking sometimes. I'm listening to you in one ear, but I'm focused on the comment section. And on the screen that I see on my laptop, it's a delayed feed. I've got to get a more pleasant-looking comment reading face. Like every now and then I look down there and see myself reading the comments. I have a very serious, stern look when I'm reading the comments. I got to find a way to sort of look at the comments, kind of a happy face. I feel like sometimes my comment reading face is just a bit too stern.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I don't have the good resting face. I'm always like looking at the camera like this, and then I'll see it pop up, and I'm like, what am I doing with my face?
Wait, give me that one more time?
Yeah, what am I doing with my face now?
Yeah, I feel like sometimes I do notice that because what I see here is on delay. But nonetheless, item number 6 in our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Speaking of Alabama having an issue with recruiting, ranked right now lower than some Tide fans are used to seeing. Now, after being down in like the 50s, 60s, and 70s nationally for a while, Crimson Tide has climbed up to number 9, and some analysts, including our own Chris Kirschner from SEC Country, feel like the Tide's going to be the top 5 by the time it's all said and done. But this is a far cry from the number 1 ranking Alabama sported for a while. What's wrong with Alabama recruiting? Well, Chris Kirschner really recently gave his take, talking about the huge number of new coaches that Alabama has. Here's Kirschner, who says Brian Dable, Brent Key, Carl Dunbar, Derek Ansley, Mike Loxley are all still fairly new to Alabama. None of them have been in Tuscaloosa for more than 2 seasons. It's not that much time in recruiting because it's all about relationships in this business. Some recruits, especially the ones Alabama targets, build relationships with assistant coaches as freshmen in high school. All of these assistants had to form new relationships with recruits. Doing that takes time. So once again, Alabama is 9th. That's a great class for almost anyone. Probably be in the top 5 by the time the 2018 cycle's over. But most of the recruiting experts think mathematically it's impossible for Alabama to have the number 1 class again. Is there a reason to be concerned about Alabama recruiting?
Well, I think if you want them to have the number 1 class in the country every year, yes, there's definitely room to be concerned. I think the fact that, listen, you're going to sign 22 guys for Alabama this year because you have some gray shirts and blue shirt guys from last year. You're also going to have to sign a punter. You're going to have to sign a punter this year. So that really gets your numbers down to 21 right now if you're Alabama. They don't have a lot of room for error. They also have some silent commitments that I think you're going to close hard on. They're in the top 10. I expect them to be in the top 5 when signing day comes around. Now, you look at that, the string of number 1 classes they've had, they've closed hard, they've been in the top 2 of every, ranking that you've seen for the last 10 years almost. So if you're expecting that, then yes, you're going to have a little bit of letdown. I look at the Alabama class and I see some quality players. I see some edge rushers. I see some positions of need. They get Nadab Joseph last week. They need corners right now. So I see this as a very specific recruiting class where Nick Saban goes out and says, man, we cannot miss on these guys. There's a chance that Alabama is without their top 6 DBs from this year heading into next year. And so the turnover at some of these positions, and we've seen the turnover from linebacker in the last couple of years, they've got to hit home runs on some of these guys. So they don't have the opportunity to just go out there and offer whoever they want to and hope that they get back some of these recruits. That's just not happening. I think they land in the top 5, but I think if you're looking for them to be at 1 at the end of this recruiting cycle again, I don't know if you're going to get your wish.
Jeremy Pettis says Bama can still get a few 5 stars out there, and Jeremy, I think you're 100% right about that. Cliff Nelson also says that losing Jeremy Pruitt is going to mean losing some key recruits. That may be true as well, or at least the absence of a guy like Pruitt as a defensive coordinator could slow down some momentum with some of these guys. I think here's the real thing for Alabama to be concerned about, though. They're 9th now. They're going to be top 5. They're going to have a fine recruiting class among the very best in the country. But they are no longer recruiting at the highest level in the SEC. Right now, that, I think, award belongs to Kirby Smart in Georgia. Now, it's going to be hard for Kirby to keep that because Alabama's going to come back strong again for 2019 as well. But there's still a chance that mathematically Georgia could get the number 1 class, the 24/7 Sports Composite Team ranking for 2018, and they are more than alive to be able to do that in 2019. For now, Kirby Smart is out recruiting his old boss, Nick Saban, and that's the kind of thing that I think the Tide fans ought to be concerned about. They are not the bull of the woods when it comes to SEC recruiting, at least for right now.
Well, and I think a lot of that comes from where some of these recruits are coming from right now. I think Kirby Smart's done a great job of locking down the state of Georgia, and right now in the state of Georgia, there are a ton of good high school football players. Nick Saban's made a living on kind of locking down Alabama, going into Louisiana, getting a ton of guys, touching on Georgia, being able to grab guys out of South Florida, the Amari Coopers, those type of guys in the world. Right now, that lane has been shut off into Georgia. So you're seeing some of these other coaches around Georgia really having to scramble from places they're going to get these recruits. And right now, when you look at the state of Alabama, when you look at the state of Louisiana, there's just not that many top-level recruits when you compare it to Georgia. They got to do a better job of getting into Florida. But I agree with you. Right now, when you look at the rankings and you look at where these guys are coming from, Kirby Smart's doing a great job of keeping those players home and being able to get guys like Justin Field and some of these other players to stay at Georgia and play between the hedges.
Here's the other thing, too. It's like when you are Nick Saban's top assistant, you actually have better relationships with a lot of recruits than Saban has. He is, by NCAA rule, restricted from having a lot of contact with these guys. Assistant coaches have a lot more contact. Kirby Smart just had better relationships. A lot of the guys that he's recruiting as part of 2018 and last year of 2017 were guys he developed relationships while at Alabama. The same thing's going to be true for Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee, who's going to have relationships he's established with guys that Nick Saban didn't have, because when you've been a long-time head coach, it's about your organization that does the recruiting for you. I mean, that's the issue here for Saban, and Chris Kirschner talked about this. You've got all these new assistant coaches, and that's what you depend on if you're Saban, because that's who does the recruiting work for you. But they don't have the long-standing relationships that guys like Jeremy Pruitt and Kirby Smart have with these guys.
Yeah, I think that's understandable. I think when you look at the recruiters of yesteryear for Nick Saban, and you do look at a guy like Lane Kiffin, Lance Thompson, who's bounced around to a ton of SEC teams, ace recruiter, Jeremy Pruitt's been an ace recruiter. You don't have those guys on staff right now. Now, you're going to have Tosh LaPua, who I think will get the defense coordinator job. Maybe he steps in that role. He's known as an ace recruiter. He's one of those guys that's on the Broyles list and all that stuff coming up. So I think they'll be able to catch their footing. I think that next year, once you have that full 25 class, I expect them to be at or near number one next year. And I love what Kirby Smart's doing. I think there's some truth to that. But I also look at, the number of 3-stars right now that Georgia's recruiting is a pretty good amount. I think there's probably 8 or 9 3-stars you have committed right now. So there is kind of that top-heavy to bottom-heavy kind of thing. And I think Alabama's dealing with just a lack of 5 stars right now.
Quick change in the subject, but Jake Higginbotham mentions LSU recruiting, talking about how Louisiana getting sewn up by Orgeron this year. And that's the one thing we know about Ed Orgeron. He is a good recruiter in terms of, I know a lot of LSU fans were upset because some guys sort of snuck out of the state of Louisiana, ended up at Alabama, and Orgeron's going to do his part to change that.
Yeah, and to me, that kind of lies in with what I'm talking about Nick Saban. Nick Saban's been able to go into Louisiana and get some of those 5 stars. LSU always has some of those 5 stars at Louisiana. Neither one of those guys right now, neither one of those programs has a 5-star commitment. When you look at LSU and Alabama, I think that'll change when it comes down to the wire.
All right, let me remind you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless, DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. And speaking of getting connected, out of number 7, an example of that, Dan Mullen, as we talked about yesterday, did officially get connected with his quarterback commit that he inherited at Florida, Matt Corral. The photo comes out of Corral and Mullen enjoying the in-home visit with each other. There, all smiles around for Corral and the Florida coaches. And, well, all is good here. I mean, that's what I guess the Florida folks are trying to have you believe. Even though it seems like this in-home visit, the subsequent official visit for Corral back to Gainesville this weekend, it seems like it's happening awful late in the process. Zach Alberverdi from SECCountry.com tried to explain why it is that Florida waited so long to kind of go out and recruit Matt Corral. Zach wrote, you don't fly cross country, make those kinds of comments to recruit if he's not a priority or you're slow playing. And meaning to the folks who had said that maybe Florida wasn't interested in Corral, this is an example that proves that he is. And Zach goes on to write, I think Mullen waited until Monday because he wanted to have Corral's position coach in place. Also get one of the last in-home visits before he signs early. That seems like a lot for me to buy. I mean, I understand that, that Zach's sourcing on this is going to be strong, but the idea that there was never any doubt in Mullen's mind that he wanted to pursue Matt Corral, I have a hard time believing that part of it.
Well, I think that Matt Corral is his guy. I think that, and listen, the only part of that I'm not really buying is, hey, he wanted to have his position coach in place. He wanted to have a quarterback coach in place before he made this trip. Well, he didn't have anybody in place when he went to Justin Fields' house a couple of weeks ago. So I don't know if I'm buying really that angle. I think that this is Dan Mullen's guy. I think he shot his shot with Justin Fields. He saw what he had on hand. Maybe, tried to see if there was a chance of prying him loose. Didn't get it done. So you look at what your current roster is at quarterback. You look at what Dan Mullen's offense is, and you say, you know what, Felipe Franks isn't the guy for this job. We have to sign somebody. So all of a sudden, Dan Mullen's attention gets turned from Emory Jones or Justin Fields. All of a sudden, Matt Corral loves your university.
Yeah,
you're my guy. You know what I mean? I think his attention gets turned, and maybe he had a little bit of an eye opener and say, you know what, this is a kid we can work with. And we talked about Joe Moorhead earlier and what Nick Fitzgerald, how he will fit in that offense. I see that kind of happening a little bit with Joe Moorhead's offense. Well, what we're going to look at with Dan Mullen. There's other ways to look around with what you're doing in these quarterbacks in these offenses where they have to be an athletic quarterback. I think they'll find some ways to work with Matt.
Frank Crowder says you've got one 5-star quarterback committed. He should have been the first person Mullen visited. I mean, there is a lot of symbolism associated with recruiting, and when you visit another quarterback besides the guy that is committed, you can't help but notice that symbolism, right?
Yeah, I agree. And that's... Listen, I fully suspect that this is Dan Mullen's guy. I think that he made this trip with Matt Corral. Maybe there was a little bit of, hey, I want to see who our quarterback's coach is going to be. What are his ideas for the quarterback position? But don't tell me that that Justin Fields wasn't on your radar, that you made no attempt to get the guy. Let's not act like Matt Corral was in the crosshairs all along.
They also offered a junior college quarterback as well, who seems like he may be going somewhere different now. But it actually was more than just Justin Fields that Florida got involved with. But in the comment section, R.J. Drummond saying that he thinks that Corral's still going to go to Florida. Maybe that's all that matters here. And Kaiser Amani also saying that he thinks that Corral's going to have great success at Florida. So ultimately, whatever process got you to this point, it sounds like a lot of Florida fans, if Corral still sticks with Florida, they'll be fine with it no matter what may have been going on behind the scenes that led up to all
Yeah,
this.
I think that's how Matt Corral is probably approaching it. Hey, no harm, no foul. You know what? I still want to be at Florida. I think that Florida probably got it's probably, Matt Corral looks at it as, hey, I really like Jim McElwain, but you can't argue what Dan Mullen is to quarterback. So maybe he's even a little bit more excited now that he's on board at Florida and things just happen to work out in his favor.
The other thing that Zach said, it kind of touches on kind of what Nick Bonanno was also kind of talking about in the comment section is that both Corral and Florida kind of flirted around with other folks here over the last few weeks. Corral took his visit to Ole Miss. There was some thought that he might get involved with LSU. I'm not sure how real that ever really got. And as you mentioned, Dan Mullen's also visiting Justin Fields. So both entities here have shopped around. Corral's done some of that. Mullen's done some of that. Maybe when it's all said and done, they realize that Mullen didn't have a better option at quarterback, and Corral didn't have a better place to go.
There's probably a little bit of that. And listen, I don't fault Dan Mullen for saying, you know what, my offense is best served when there's a dual threat guy. And maybe he looked at Matt Corral's film after a while and said, you know what, he's not that dual threat, breakaway runner that we want, but I can work with a guy like that. And I think that's probably what you're getting out of Dan Mullen right now.
Mark Lewis Johnson says, breaking. Wilt Muschamp hired LeVar Ball as a 10th assistant coach to secure LaMelo and LiAngelo for the South Carolina basketball team. Obviously referencing what we were talking about earlier with KJ Henry's dad, given what had gone on with Jake Bentley years ago.
Yeah.
So SEC fans going to continue to have a little bit of fun with that story.
I think those guys' college eligibility is already up after they signed on in Europe. Where are they playing?
I think it's
Europe
Lithuania, I
so
believe.
bad.
Yeah,
oh, man,
Lithuania.
Talk about a story that won't go away.
No doubt about it. Item number 8 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Speaking of coaches and recruiting, an in-home visit apparently went down on Monday night for new Tennessee coach Jeremy Pruitt and Adrian Martinez, the 4-star quarterback that he inherits at Tennessee. The only problem about this is, while SEC Country reports that the in-home visit took place, we don't see the customary tweet the same way we had Matt Corral and Dan Mullen side by side, arm in arm. We didn't really see that from Martinez, who has done plenty of that in the past. Let me give you a couple of examples here. There was a Nebraska coach that came to visit Martinez. That's the place he's considering going. Martinez gives you the obligatory shot of those two guys standing side by side together there. Mike Canales, the old Tennessee quarterbacks coach, who was obviously close with Martinez. Back in November, he makes the visit together. You get the side-by-side photo between those two. But as of this afternoon, the last time I checked, no photo of Pruitt there in the house with Martinez. Is that a reason to be concerned?
No, I don't think so at all. Listen, Martinez, the fact that he's still on board now after everything that's happened the last couple of weeks and the fallout at Tennessee and the couple of decommitments they've got and the fact that Jeremy Pruitt's still at Alabama, the guy's going to Tennessee, in my opinion. I think that he's going to flirt with Scott Frost. You're going to look at a possible place in Nebraska to go. I think there's other opportunities for him out there. But this is a guy who's been in love with Tennessee for a while. He committed back in May. I think the fact that he's still looking that direction, hasn't publicly decommitted. I think that Adrian Martinez is a great pickup for Jeremy Pruitt in Tennessee right now.
I actually think there's a really good chance he doesn't go to Tennessee, though. That's just my guess.
And that's possible. I mean, if he winds up at Nebraska, I won't be shocked either. But I think Tennessee fans should be overjoyed that he is on board right now, still with Jeremy Pruitt in Tennessee, and hasn't officially done any decommitment.
Here's the reason why I would be a little concerned about this if I was Tennessee. Obviously, you think back to the Will Muschamp years at Florida, another really good defensive mind, terrific recruiter, but there's something about that defensive guy trying to get his quarterback. It's a crucial relationship in college football. Head coaches need their quarterback, and when you are the offensive-minded head coach, you know exactly the kind of quarterback you're looking for, and you know exactly what the pitch is going to be, and that guy knows as long as you're there, things are going to be fine. But offensive coordinators for defensive-minded coaches are very different. There is a little bit more fluidity there. You got to figure out who that guy is going to be, what that offense is going to be like, and that's just a little bit tougher sell for a defensive-minded head coach to make. It's the reason why Muschamp ultimately didn't work at Florida, and you've got to admit at Tennessee that's got to at least be in the back of your mind a little bit.
Oh, it's 100% in the back of your mind, but I think right now when you look at current roster, Tennessee has more to work with than Florida does right now. I don't think Felipe Franks fits in Dan Mullen's offense at all. I think the lack of movement in the pocket, the lack of being able to move around in the backfield and create plays for Felipe Franks, I don't think that's there. I think you have to go out and find somebody if you're Dan Mullen that you can plug in right now, and Matt Corral's that guy. I think when you look at Adrian Martinez, of course you want him. Of course he's a good quarterback. He's a 4 or 5-star guy, whatever you see him as if you're Tennessee. But they have other options on the roster right now. I think whatever coordinator comes in will be able to work with whatever he's trying to do.
Michael Morrow, a Georgia fan, referencing what we're talking about with the defensive guys trying to find their quarterback. He says, Kirby Smart certainly doesn't seem to have any problem getting quarterbacks BA. And, Michael, that's true. But one of the reasons why Kirby Smart looks like a genius right now is because for his 2017 class, he was able to flip Jake Fromm from Alabama to Georgia. If you don't have Jake Fromm doing what he did for Georgia this season, the odds of Georgia being 12-1 SEC champions in the Rose Bowl, maybe not great.
Yeah.
Getting that quarterback is a great way to make yourself look really, really smart as a coach.
I agree. I agree. And you already had a guy on board in Jacob Eason when you got there, and all of a sudden you switch him out for a guy like Jake Fromm, who's been great. The key to all this is Kirby Smart's not putting a ton on Jake Fromm. He's leaning on that offensive line and leaning on those running backs. That can make a quarterback look awful good. Dan Mullen is going to be centered around a quarterback, which it kind of creates a different situation.
By the way, Jeremy Pettis, to go back to what we're saying about recruiting here, about Alabama and Georgia, he says, Kirby just left Alabama 1 year ago. Y'all calm down. Saban's going to continue to bring in top coaches and players. Stop it. Saban's the best coach ever. Kirby's not done crap yet or won an SEC or only won an SEC ring. Pump the brakes. The problem with that, though, is Kirby is in the college football playoff right now and building a real juggernaut for both the 2018 and the 2019 recruiting classes. Now, Alabama's going to be just fine, but the momentum that Kirby Smart has established for the moment is really impossible to deny. Is it going to last? None of us know that, but you can't deny what Smart has built up to this point.
I don't think you can definitely can't deny what he's done this year and what he's done in his short time recruiting at Georgia. I do think there's a little bit of honesty in what Jeremy Pettis is saying, that Nick Saban's had number one classes like 9 straight years.
That's true.
And so if you got to pick, what's the median and what's the norm and what you feel like will fall back into place, then a lot of people can give Nick Saban the benefit of the doubt in some of these situations. I think Kirby Smart's done a great job of keeping his kids in Georgia. I think that's a lot of what's going on right now. I don't know that Nick Saban gets the opportunity to bounce that out this season, but I think it's going to be a good matchup recruiting for a lot of years to come.
Looks like Georgia got a chance to sign at least 5 of the top 6 players in Georgia here for the class 2018. Item number 9 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Listen, the rule I try to follow in life is let's don't go counting other people's money, putting your hands on other people's wallet.
I agree.
Rocky Long, the San Diego State coach, apparently doesn't necessarily feel that way. Brett McMurphy, tweeting about what he heard from Long in a radio interview, said about Jimbo Fisher's contract at Texas A&M, he, meaning Fisher, doesn't make 1 tackle, doesn't catch 1 pass, doesn't score a touchdown. We're not only in this to have a salary, we're in this to develop young men. So coaching salaries are embarrassing at times, he says, on a sports radio show out there on XTRA, 1360 AM in San Diego, California. Should Jimbo Fisher be embarrassed by his contract?
No, not embarrassed at all. And here's what I think. What was this guy's name? I can't even remember.
Rocky Long.
Rocky Long. If somebody walks up to you with a $75 million contract and says, you know what, we're going to guarantee this money if you just come coach at our school, be hard-pressed to think that Rocky Long is going to turn down $75 million. There was always a precedent set when I was in the NFL. You just don't talk about other players' money.
Yeah.
You know what? They set the standard for themselves. They've created their own net worth. They can go out and get whatever money they want to. You can't fault a guy that's going to take money that's going to change not only his life or his kid's life, but his grandkid's life. And I think that's what he's doing. That's what Jimbo Fisher was doing. For another coach that's kind of on that same level as him to step out and say that, I think it was in bad taste and bad character.
Steve Weaver says that Rocky was just jealous he had to pay all those California taxes. Maybe that's the issue. Maybe he's just a little bit jealous of Jimbo Fisher. But here's the thing. I'm all for players getting paid. I think the top players should be able to market themselves and make some money off their likeness. I'm all for all of that. But I'm also a realist in that while that money should be coming from somewhere, it's probably not supposed to be coming from the top head coaches, because if Jimbo Fisher goes to Texas A&M and wins, he's worth 4 times the $7.5 million he's going to be making.
Yeah.
The same way that Nick Saban, you couldn't pay him enough to equal the value that he brings into Alabama. These top flight coaches are just worth a lot more than that. Now, the mediocre coaches, that sort of mid-level SEC coach, a lot of those guys are overpaid. But Texas A&M thinks that Fisher's going to be one of the best, and if he is, he's going to more than earn that money back for Texas A&M.
And here's another angle to look at it, not only Texas A&M, but look at the players that Jimbo Fisher's put in the NFL. Look at the players that Nick Saban's put in the NFL. Ask them how hard up they are for money right now. I think Nick Saban's players in the NFL combined have made like $350 million.
Yeah.
It's something crazy like that. So getting a guy like Jimbo Fisher to go to Texas A&M, it's not like he's being selfish. He's trying to help those guys get to the next level as well. He's just understanding what's the current college football model right now and doing the best he can. I will never fault a guy for taking $7.5 million a year.
Item number 10 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Georgia gets some good news in recruiting yesterday, and a special video produced by our friends right here at SEC Country. The 4-star offensive lineman Trey Hill from Houston County, another one of those Georgia guys that Kirby Smart's finding a way to keep it home. He committed to Georgia yesterday. I thought this commitment video was too good not to at least play part of it. Here is Hill making his announcement that Georgia is going to be his school. Even if you're not a Georgia fan, I think you'll like the production value on this video. Take a look.
My decision was very hard. It took a lot of thought and prayer.
Let's get focused. Let's attack. That's what it's all about.
But it finally came to me. My name is Trey Hill.
Let's work. Let's work. Let's work.
Try to climb over me. Now, I really know my choice. Go Dogs.
So that's Trey Hill. He makes his announcement going to Georgia. And I got to tell you, in the video, you know, I'm proud enough of myself anyway if I do like some sort of push-up, something like that. He's got somebody punch him in the rib while he's trying to do the push-ups. Is that the way you trained back in your playing days?
That's not the way I trained, and it's definitely not the way I did a recruit commitment video. I mean, it's like these commitment videos, man. These are like these Hollywood, themed. Like, I mean, just like over the top.
I got to tell you, that's one of our better ones. I think the Trey Hill is one of our better ones. What we did for J.C. Horn, now he didn't keep that commitment, but what we did for Horn, who at the time was announcing Tennessee, we had a good time doing that. We actually did that right here in our studio. But in terms of our SEC country work, the Trey Hill commitment's a pretty good one there.
It's a beautifully produced video. I'll just say that much.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good stuff there from him on that. All right, we had a suggestion in our comment section for our Champion of Life. We'll give that to you coming up. Of course, AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Now let's get ready to take a look at our AT&T look ahead here. One basketball game in the SEC tonight. It is Ben Howland's Bulldogs of Mississippi State traveling to, I believe it's the Shoemaker Arena. Is that right?
Oof.
This is the Shoemaker
I have
Arena.
no idea.
Cincinnati against the Bearcats. 25th ranked Bearcats did lose on Saturday to Florida, who snapped a 3-game losing streak themselves. Nonetheless, in the SEC tonight, you get the Bearcats and the Bulldogs.
Gotta be honest, we'll be watching. Probably won't catch that matchup right there. I have to catch that one. I have to DVR that one and catch that one a different time.
So that's what's going on in the SEC tonight. Of course, here on AT&T SEC Country Live, we're always looking to close up the show with some Champions of Life. And Jake Hickenbotham in the comment section said, how about the comment section's Champion of Life today? Because they really brought it all day long. I will tell you, there's nothing I love more than watching y'all just kind of go at each other about something that could not have less to do with anything. But like, I just love seeing the passion from LSU fans and Florida fans and Georgia fans and everything in between. You guys are having like your own conversation while we're doing the show, and I can't always respond to all of them because A, we never get anything done. But I do love seeing that.
I do too. And there's times that after the camera goes off, we'll sit here and just read some of y'all. Some of y'all is just back and forth. I swear to God, I think it's hilarious.
Always very entertaining. We actually do have a different Champion of Life, though. Golf.com kind of put this on the Twitter feed. I really don't know what this has to do with anything. We showed you a bunch of snow pictures and ice pictures from around the South yesterday. If you have any snow and ice, though, around your local golf course, just make sure you don't make the same mistake this guy did inside the sand trap. Take a look at this from Golf.com.
Oh,
the sand trap is frozen. He stands on it with the spikes on, tries to hit out of it.
Hits
the back of his head so hard.
There's no way he doesn't have a concussion.
I mean, that is the whole thing is hilarious. But the back of the head on the ice, that's no laughing matter right there,
I don't think
right?
it's hilarious. It looks like, his head bounced like a basketball off that ice. That looks so painful, man.
Of course, the Houston Texans would push him right back out there,
though. That's...
The Houston Texans would say, next tee box for you.
That's such a low blow. That was crazy. Oh, man.
All right, thanks so much for being with us on AT&T SEC Country Live. Check out our podcast. You can find it on iTunes. We'll have it up right away. You can listen to the full audio version of the show if you miss any. Let me try that one more time. If you missed any portion of our broadcast, boy, I am tired. It has been a long few days here. Also, make sure you share the show with your friends on Facebook. Let them know we're talking about the SEC each and every day here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you again at 3 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. Talk to you then.